Water Resources. Tonight's meeting is not a formal hearing. Rather, this is a public meeting and an opportunity for you to ask questions of ADWR staff and provide ADWR with your comments regarding whether the director of ADWR should initiate procedures to designate the Gila Bend groundwater basin as a subsequent active management area. Though this meeting is not a formal public hearing, I will ask that you please be respectful in comments and questions asked by our staff and your fellow attendees. This meeting is being recorded, so it's important for those speaking to speak clearly so we have a clear record of your comments. Comments and questions may be limited to a certain amount of time per speaker, and we encourage larger groups wishing to present the same message to designate a single representative. For those of you in person, we have speaker cards available at the sign-in table. If you would like to present a comment or question for the record, please fill out a speaker card and give it to one of the ADWR staff present. For those of you on the webinar, we've provided a link to a virtual speaker card in the chat. ADWR will be accepting any written comments that anyone may wish to submit to the department regarding this meeting until 5 p.m. on Friday, February 12th. Written comments or questions should be submitted to the attention of Sharon Scantlebury at scantlebury@azwater.gov or by fax at 602-771-8686. This information will be provided again later, and Sharon's business cards are located on the table near the entrance. Please keep your phones and other media devices on mute during the meeting, and when possible, minimize side conversation so that everyone in attendance can hear. We will now start with some introductions. My name is Lainey Meeker. I am the program supervisor for the statewide planning section at the department, and this evening I will be your facilitator for this informal public meeting. With me from ADWR today are Ryan Mitchell, our chief hydrologist, Natalie Mast, active management area director, Nicole Klobus, chief counsel, Colin Wogenstall, statewide planning manager, Doug McGeeran, communications administrator, Teresa Johnson, administrative assistant for the Water Planning and Permitting Division, and Sharon Scantlebury, our docket supervisor. Ryan Mitchell will be providing an overview of the hydrology in the Gila Bend groundwater basin, followed by Natalie Mast, who will be providing information on what an active management area is and the designation process. Following the presentations I just described, we will open the floor to public comments and questions, and I will provide more guidelines at that time. So the content of today's presentation and any answers to questions are provided for informational purposes only. They are not intended to provide comprehensive guidance and are not intended to serve as legal advice. If you have legal questions about your specific circumstances under a potential AMA, you may contact an attorney. I will now turn things over to Ryan Mitchell, the chief hydrologist, to provide an overview of the hydrology in the Gila groundwater basin.
Thank you. My name is Ryan Mitchell. I'm the chief hydrologist. I'm also one of the assistant directors. The division or the department that I oversee is the technical branch of DWR, so the groundwater modeling section and the field services section. So the folks that go around and collect the water level data, the hydrologists, geologists, and engineers. So I will be speaking to the data, and policy and other questions will go to Natalie. So for the hydrology agenda today, there are a few different topics we're going to cover. First, we're going to start off with an overview of the region. So most of the folks in this room know where Gila Bend is, but we'll go into a little bit of detail where it's at, what its physiographic province is, what its precipitation values look like, what the water levels look like. We'll go through just some general data. We'll discuss the ADWR index well line in our index book. That's the series of wells that we measure either annually, quarterly, or even monthly. There will be some statistical review of some of the published data that we've released and that we've discussed in the Governor's Water Policy Council over the last 6-7 months. We'll look at some of the existing data that we have for the Gila Bend Basin. That data would include index well measurements, so that'd be water level measurements, discharge measurements, so where we have actually calculated well yield. We'll look at water level trends over time. take a look at what the difference in water level has been over a 20-year period. And then we'll discuss briefly land subsidence in Gila Bend. So here's a map of the Gila Bend Basin. And for folks unfamiliar, to the north, this is a Highway 85 that goes to Buckeye. It also continues down to Ajo. We also have the highway going out to Maricopa. We have I-8 coming from Casa Grande, heading out to California. The Gila River itself is here in blue, and it makes the bend around the Gila Mountains. This is an index map up here at the top, so it shows you where the Gila Bend Basin is relative to Phoenix and to Tucson. So the basin itself is categorized as being mountainous with a high desert plain. What that essentially means is we're at a little bit of elevation in the mountain regions, but the humidity is quite low. So that's the arid environment. The elevation at the basin, the bottom lowest portions of the Gila Basin are around 600 feet above mean sea level. In the mountain ranges, we get to over 3,000 feet in elevation. There are no perennial streams. So perennial are streams that flow continuously year round. All the washes and drainages in the basin are ephemeral, meaning they only flow when there's heavy rain events or storm events. The Gila River itself drains the basin. So the surface water that comes through here, it all collects around the Painted Rock Reservoir area and exits towards the Painted Rock Dam. The Gila River itself is about a 36-mile long stretch. So it is a relatively large basin. The Gila River is perennial above the Gillespie Dam. The Gillespie Dam is located up here to the north. Surface flows are typically diverted into either the Enterprise Canal or the Gila Bend Canal. Both of those canals do have their flows augmented with well water. And for historical background, the Gillespie Dam diverted water from 1921 until it was breached in 1993. And since then, there's a series of wells around the Gillespie Dam that do pump the water to the surface. Groundwater, which is the water that's within the basin, not just by the river, not the surface flows only, but the groundwater is actually the water that is inside all of this area here as well. The groundwater, we'll talk a little bit more about it too, but an aquifer unit is the unconsolidated basin fill alluvium. So this is like the loose sand and gravels, and the water actually exists and occurs in the interstitial pore space in those areas. There are two AZGS and USGS identified basin fill units, and they're aptly named upper basin fill and lower basin fill. All that means is that their roundness and stratigraphy is slightly different, but they're both unconsolidated alluvial material. In the valley floor, there's roughly 6 to 8 inches of precipitation annually, so that's not a lot of rainfall. And it gets up to about on the high end, 12 inches of rainfall in the higher elevations of the mountains. So this is just giving some general the background about the region. The next couple of slides are slides that were presented to the Governor's Water Policy Council on more than one occasion over the last 6-7 months. And it's an explainer of our index well line. So index wells, so there are a couple 100,000 wells in the state of Arizona, but there are 1,700 and change wells that we actually have access to that we monitor regularly. And we categorize them as active index wells. The index well line represents wells that are either on state land or we have joint access agreements with other entities, or we have landowner agreement for us to let us come onto your property and just measure the water level. Those data are then collected and compiled and put into a publicly available database. This map here shows where all the 1,700 plus wells are located. The colors only indicate how frequently they're measured. So blue are wells that we measure annually. Red is quarterly, green is semi-annually, and we have a few that are monthly, depending on if they're in an area that requires frequent measurements. Sorry, I'll keep it close. Of those 1,700 wells, 135 of them are equipped with pressure transducers that the state owns. These are going to be pressure diaphragms that record the water level continuously. and they will record that data for us. Of the 135 of them, 80 of them will transmit it through telemetry, mostly every evening. The other ones we go out to and download on a periodic basis. But those are wells where we have high frequency data, where we've recorded, daily, sometimes multiple times per day measurements throughout multiple years. So the frequency of data collection is much higher. All water level measurements are updated to what we call the Groundwater Site Inventory Interactive Web Map. So GWSI, you'll hear that acronym a few more times. So Groundwater Site Inventory. It is a publicly available database that is updated daily whenever we do collect water level measurements. And those are going to be all the hydrographs that you'll see, which are the water level plots over time. Anytime our guys go out and collect data, we make it available as soon as we can. Here's a link to the GWSI web map. It is an interactive web map, so you can follow this link and zoom into your area and see what wells we have access to that we've collected data from. You can also poke around the state and see what else you can find. So next, we're going to take a look at a couple of plots that are box and whisker diagrams. So this is going to be, it looks a little tricky at first, but they're actually really easy to understand once you get the explainer. But the data that we're going to be looking at are from the Open File Report number 20 that was published last April. It's the Open File Report, meaning that as we get new data, we update the water levels within it. But in particular, and there's a link to the publication here as well, but we're going to look at Table 6. And Table 6 of OFR 20 is a set of data that has a statistical analysis of index wells, so the wells that we have access to, that we've measured for, because the report has multiple time periods and multiple tables, but this particular one has a 20-year period of record. We wanted to look at a record that's more than just 1 or 2 years or 5 years. All of the wells that are used in this table and for the statistical analysis all have the same measurements going back to the year 2000 all the way up to 2020, where we had continuous access. In other words, it's apples to apples comparisons with their wells that we've had continuous access to. And box and whisker diagrams they look kind of silly, and I'll explain in a second, but they're an easy way to look at a whole lot of data in one small image that kind of gives you an impression of what the data means. Because it is a statistical analysis, what the box and whisker plot represents, this rectangle here's the box, these little lines at the end are the whiskers. But if you took all of the data that were collected over that period of time, it doesn't matter what it is, it could be like rolling the dice and getting a number back, or it could be anything that you're measuring. If you line it up from smallest to largest and you say 25% of the data points are here, the next 25 are here, the next 25, and then the last 25. So you break it up into quarters, into 4 pieces. That's what the box and whiskers are showing you. So this top line here is the upper quarter, so the top 25% of the data points. This next box here to this line would be the second quartile. This one's the third quartile, and here's the fourth. So all of the data is represented here, but how big or small the box looks tells you how close the data points are. So if you got the same reading over and over and over, it'd be flat. If you had a big spread of the data, then you would have a long whisker and a big box. And I'll explain that on the upcoming plots. And if you have any errant data that's more than 1.5 times the interquartile range, in other words, it's statistically an outlier, we do indicate that in these plots, that there may or may not be some measurements that could have been faulty measurements or don't represent the rest of the data. And like I said, these were all from a larger presentation that's been given to the Governor's Water Policy Council. So if you guys wanted to go back and see a longer explainer and see more plots and more explanations, those slideshows are on our website, and the video with the explainer is on there as well. What we did in those meetings, we actually looked at all 52 basins within the state, and we looked at this type of plot for all of them. And at the end, we took the 3 basins that were not within an AMA or an INA that had the greatest or showed the largest levels of decline over that 20-year period per our index well line from that publication of OFR number 20. So what you see here, we're going to focus in on Gila Bend, but what you see at Gila Bend, Renegers Plain, and Wilcox Basin, they all had, over that 20-year period, all of their wells that we had access to, that we had continuous monitoring for 20 years, all showed a decline of varying degrees. So what I was explaining to you, the upper, middle, and third, and then fourth quartile range, this is showing you the spread of the data. Where the box lies is where 50% of the data points lie. So that kind of helps you see the distribution. Over here on this map on the right, wherever you see this red blob within the basin boundary, those are mapped land subsidence features. So those are features that we have recorded and mapped and been monitoring over the years, watching the land surface elevation dropping over time. And so all three of these basins show large groundwater level depletions plus land subsidence expressions at the surface. So now we're going to take a look at the existing data for the Gila Bend Basin. So this is the data, these are all the data that we have now. Right now, as of this last couple of months, we currently have 28 active index wells in the Gila Bend Basin, and this is their distribution. It might be kind of hard to see on this projector screen, but there are red dots around here, a couple here, and we spread out through this area. We have a few more red dots along all this agricultural land and plus the highways. So this is giving you a sense of where our index wells are. This is federal land that we don't have access to. So we don't have any index wells down there that we monitor. Of all of the 28 active index wells that are in the Gila Bend Basin, 5 of them are measured quarterly, so every 3 months. And the rest of them are measured at least annually. We also do something in the field services section called basin sweeps. And a basin sweep is when we take all of our hydrologists, everyone that we have, and we contact all the landowners we can possibly reach. And we say, we'd like to get a measurement of as many wells as possible in as short a period of time as possible. So usually it's like a month or 2 months, we'll get several hundred. And the reason why we like to do it that way is we'll get access to more than just our 28 index wells. We'll get a bigger range of data, more data points. We'll also get it in such a short period of time that it acts like a snapshot of the aquifer in that moment. You get to know what the water level elevation is across the whole basin. And of interest, we've done 3 basin sweeps in Gila Bend. And what I find interesting is this, is in 1993, we had 300 measurements that we were able to take. In 2008, we had 182. And in 2020, we had 107. So we are down to a third of the number of wells that we had access to over these 3 different basin sweeps. So access to data is declining over time for us. Discharge data over time. So this would be when we send out our field guys and we'll actually measure your well yield with you. And we'll either do like a flow meter calibration test or we'll do some other test to get you the accurate discharge measurement for your wells. We've done about 350 of them in the Gila Bend Basin over the past few decades. And if we are able to access the pumping water level, so while the well is running and we can get that pumping water level, we can then calculate for you guys what your specific capacity is. And we have 19 measurements of those. And then we also have our land subsidence data. So this is the whole of all of our existing data right now. There are 6 stream flow gauges in the Gila Bend Basin. They're monitored by the USGS. This is a data point that we would use when we're doing background hydrologic investigations. We want to know what the surface flows and streams get whenever there is a storm event. What does that flow rate look like? For everyone's edification, here are the 6 gauges along with links where you can go to and see what their flow has been over time. These are monitored by the USGS, not by us, but it is data that we have access to. So now we're going to look at some of that GWSI data, so the groundwater site inventory data. And these hydrographs, along with the site IDs, they can all be found on that interactive web map from the previous slide, but also following this link here on the slide as well. I've included that along with the site ID of each of these wells. On the left, this is the index map, so it's showing you where these wells are located, but this is the Gila Bend Basin boundary in red. This light pink kind of blob around here is actually the mapped land subsidence feature that we're monitoring in Gila Bend. And this arrow to the yellow dot is showing you where the well is for the plot that's on the right side. Each of the plots will have all of our water level measurements that we've taken for that well since we began having access. The hydrograph, for folks who have a hard time seeing, On the bottom here, we have time. I do have some pop-ups that'll show you what years some of these data points are at, so you can get a sense of the scale of how much time has gone by. And on the y-axis, we have the depth to water or the water level elevation. So depth to water is just depending on where you're standing, how deep is it down. Water level elevation would be if you were to remove all of the soil and earth, where would the water be? What would that surface look like? And that's the water level elevation. Water table is another term people use. So this particular well is located to the north of Gila Bend. So here's Gillespie Dam. This is going up towards Buckeye. So I can give you a reference point of a sense of where you are. We have our first data point on this well from 1952, and we have a depth to water about 187 feet. The water level, it does go up and down some over the preceding decades, but come 1995 is where it's reaches another local high point of 194 feet below land surface. And then from 1995 to 2023, you can see the general trend over time. Remember, this is a couple of decades, right? This isn't just responding to a wet season or a dry season. This is the trend over the decades. We show a 239-foot decline in the water table within this well over a 28-year period. That's a non-trivial amount of decline. Now we're going to move over a little further down gradient from the Gila River. So remember, Gillespie Dam is still up here. Diversion channels and a lot of ag is occurring around this area. This particular well, we started recording in 1965. You can see here that the water table over time is kind of going up and moving up until about 1995. Latest reading or measurement that we've taken at this well was in 2022. That is a 270 or 67-foot decline in 27 years. So that previous well was right here. Now we've moved a bit further to the south and slightly to the east. It's a very similar trend. So what I hope everyone's starting to see here is they're all kind of following the same trend. And when you see trends like that across multiple wells, across an entire basin, that gives you a sense of what the aquifer itself is doing. It's not just responding to local pumping or to surface flow from a rainy season. It's the actual aquifer itself, right? So first measurement, 1953, up and down some until mid-90s, same trend. Latest measurement here was taken in 2023 in October. That's a 208-foot decline over a 28-year period. So now we've moved further down. We're getting away from the Gillespie Dam. We're getting close to the bend. You can see that there's a period here where we didn't have a whole lot of measurements. Then we had a whole bunch, and it's just a frequency of when we had access. But the general trend is the same. Mid-90s, 151-foot decline over a 26-year period. So this one I think is interesting. If we move away from the active pumping centers, so where there's active agriculture going on, if we move away from influence from surface flows, from whenever there's wet seasons or if there's any SRP releases, if we get away from all that and just look at the aquifer itself, get away from the local effects, we can actually get a sense of what the basin fill alluvial aquifer is doing over time, not just responding to surface water. And here, our first measurement was in 79. Kind of similar, mid-90s, before we start to see a pretty steady decline after that. 2023 was our last measurement there. So that's a 54-foot decline in an area where there's no active aggressive pumping. So this is representative of how the aquifer itself as a whole is depleting. A couple more, and then we'll get to some other graphics. Here's one because it's not always the case. Like these were all following very similar trends, but as we get to this flat area over here, you start to see some variation in the hydrographs. But in general, roughly the trend is the same. But we have our first measurement in 79. The mid-90s here, we have a peak and it kind of comes back down and it's bouncing some, but really we didn't have enough frequency of data. These are, a year or two apart. We'd like it to be more frequent than that. But from 2000 to 2019, we have a 63-foot decline in 19 years. So it's 10 years shorter period than the previous hydrographs, and 63 feet of decline. We move up closer to the bend. This one looks a lot different, right? So this hydrograph doesn't look like any of the previous ones. I wanted to show this to you guys because this represents a well that's screened shallow. So it's responding more frequent, it's responding quicker to surface flows and not necessarily the deep aquifer as a system as a whole. But you can really see it going up and down with wet and dry seasons. But if we take the overall trend over the decades, because this does go back to the 50s, and just take our last two data points, that's a 44-foot decline. So because the water level is going up and down so much, it's actually elongating the axis, so it makes it look like it's not so much movement. But if you look at it, that's actually 44 feet. So it's still a non-trivial decline. Last one, this one shows, this is a well that's towards the Painted Rock Reservoir. And whenever there's a lot of surface flow and the water starts to pond and pool back here, the locals will be familiar with the area. This particular well responded quite a bit to the wet seasons that we know on record. So this is a well that you'll see that really is responding to surface flow. So 1953 to 77, there was a general declining trend. Rose back up up to 84, down again, up again, and then from the mid 90s, down again. But what's interesting here, so this measurement we took in December of 2022. And last March, I'm sorry, SRP had that large release from the Bartlett Dam. And there was a lot of water flowing through the Gila for about 3 months. And you can actually really see it in this well. The other ones didn't capture it because they're screened deeper and they're measuring the groundwater. And this one is screened shallower, so you're getting more influence from surface. But here's when they released the water. Then here's a measurement we took last December. So it actually went up a good, 25 feet or so from the SRP release. So that was December 26th. I had some of our guys go back out there a couple of weeks ago, and it's already back down. So when you're looking at water level data, you do need to look at the longer period. You can't look at just a single measurement or measurements taken within just a few months or even just a year or two. You want to look at the overall trend, and you want to look at enough wells over the whole basin so that you have a good understanding of what the aquifer itself is doing. Because if you were to come in and look at just any of these small snapshots and say, well, hey, from 89 to 94, my well has only gone up, and that would be a true statement. But it doesn't show or represent what the whole basin is doing. So it's kind of hard to see, but I'll try to explain this to you guys. These are water level elevation contours. So a contour line is a line that is the exact same elevation going around. Like for example, if you see like the lake go down at Lake Mead and you have that bathtub ring, you could call that an elevation contour line because it's the same elevation all the way around that whole lake, right? Water level does that too. So if the water level is not perfectly flat because it's not a lake, you'll see like a single contour interval that tells you the elevation. Let's say 1,000 people at land surface or something. It'll be that same line the whole way across. So what we did is we took our oldest data set that we could find, which was a map series from 1993, and we plotted the water level elevation from 1993. And then we used all of these wells that you see here in red with green circles, all these dots. We used their water level elevation data from 2020. And we said, how has the water level elevation changed in those two time snapshots? Did it go up? Did it go down? Where did it go down the most? Where did it stay flat? And these are actually the exact same map. It's just this one is showing you where the well locations were used. And this one, we removed the well locations for ease of viewing, even though it's still kind of hard to see. But you can see that there are several, 200-300 foot decline areas, the localized cones of depression, areas of overpumping. And this is the difference in water level elevation between those two time periods. So over that roughly 30-year period. And you see, kind of hard to read, but 230, 260, I believe. But this will be published for you guys to look at closer, but it's giving you a trend of where are the areas where the water level is going down the most in general. So last topic for me, well, one of the last topics. Land subsidence is something that is, it's a phenomenon that occurs when the water level drops in soil that was previously saturated is now no longer saturated, it's dried. And something can happen depending on the grain size and how severe the dewatering is. So these next few illustrations will help show what it is and how it occurs so that you guys can interpret the maps that I'll show you of the subsidence features that we've monitored there. So land subsidence is classified as the lowering of the land surface elevation due to aquifer depletion. And you might think, well, how does removing your water from soil make the land surface go down? And the best way to do it is let's take a cubic foot or cubic meter, whatever you want. We'll take a cubic foot of the soil. This would be aquifer materials. This is like loose sand and gravel and silts and clays, any of that alluvium that makes up the basin fill that's been fully saturated with groundwater for millennia, right? It's part of the aquifer system. Let's blow it up so we can take a look at it. You'll have grains of sand, you'll have little gravel, you'll have pieces of soil, but in the interstitial pore space around all of your sand and gravel grains is where the groundwater resides. There isn't an underground river, there isn't an underground cave. That's not what an aquifer is. The water itself is being held mixed in with the soil. So what happens, just like if you were to take a cup full of marbles, you could pour water into it and it would add water in that interstitial space, the space in between the marbles, until it starts to spill over. So even though the cup of marbles looks full, you can add water to it until it can't hold any more water. That water is the aquifer water. That's what an aquifer system is. But we don't have a cup full of marbles that are nice and round. We have irregular pieces of sand and gravel. They are partially held up by leaning on each other. So they're using their own skeleton, as we call it, aquifer skeleton. But the water itself actually helps hold it open too. It's called buoyancy pressure. So there's going to be some buoyant pressure from the water itself. And when you remove the water, you actually take away some of the strength of that cubic foot. So here's what it kind of looks like. So if you drop the water table down and now you've dewatered this little cubic foot and you remove the water, that water was help holding some of the sand grains up just through surface tension and buoyant pressure. Without it, the weight of all of the dirt above you in the soil is really heavy and it will compress some of that sand and gravel and clays. And when the sand and gravel, it's like squeezing a sponge. And when you compress it and you let it dry like that, you no longer have a cubic foot anymore. You have a compressed cube. And that, when you have that occurring, not just in this one cubic spot, but all around the whole area, it's happening in the whole zone, you will create a land subsidence feature. And we can measure when the surface elevation has been dropping, and we can see where they are across basins. If you have land subsidence that's occurring with fine grained material like silts and clays, it is actually an inelastic compression, meaning you can't refill it and inflate it back up. So even if you were to get this to refill with water, the surface elevation will stay down. It won't actually rise back up again. It's not floating. So that's why it's a danger indicator to us, the canary in the coal mine, that the aquifer is being depleted to the point where now the surface elevation is dropping. And that can escalate quickly if you don't catch it. So if it is inelastic, recharging the aquifer will not recover that land subsidence. It becomes a permanent loss of storage. So if you were to refill this cube again, you don't have that full cubic foot anymore. It's been compressed, so you won't even be able to get as much water back into it, even if you tried. So a question I get a lot is, well, how do you measure it? Because land subsidence is happening not only where you're standing, but for miles in all different directions. So you can't see it firsthand. If you're standing there looking around, you're like, I don't see it. How is this subsiding? Well, the way that we do that is actually using satellite data. So we are a partner in what's called the INSAR program. Like INSAR is just a interferometric synthetic aperture radar satellites, and there are numerous satellites that we use where we work with a lot of folks across the state and with NASA. But essentially, the way this process works is satellite will go across the land and it will measure to sub-millimeter detail what the elevation is from the satellite to the land surface there. It'll go back over that same exact flight path again and again over time, and it'll record what is the difference in elevation each pass. And then we take all of those data and we process them to get, well, from this period of time to this period of time, how much is it dropped down? Is it, a few inches? Is it a few feet? And then we create maps of how much the land has gone down over any set period of time, 10 years, 20 years, whatever period we want to look at. We have all that data. It's all publicly available. But this is just a quick overview of how the data is actually collected, because you can't see it firsthand. It happens slowly over time. This map shows you where these 6 different satellites orbit or transit across the state. And where they transit, we collect their elevation data. And there's a lot of overlap, multiple satellites within the Phoenix area and, of course, the Gila Bend area. So we don't have just one satellite that we're looking at. We're looking at multiple satellites that record the same type of data. And that way we can ensure that we have repeatability and that the data is valid. The INSAR program has many cooperators. So federal, state, county, there are a lot of NGOs, a lot of public entities and private entities across the state. It's a very active program. We do have several different web pages that explain more on this if you care to dig into it. But this map, just so everyone can see, is showing these red and yellow blobs that you're seeing are actually zones of land subsidence across the state. So not just Gila Bend, but everywhere across the state where we're seeing it. So we've got a big feature here. We've got some in the West Valley of Phoenix through Eloy and Wilcox area. And there's a lot of areas where there's excessive groundwater pumping, where we've observed land subsidence. This is a map that shows the land subsidence feature for Gila Bend specifically. Of note, one thing that I'd like to point out, similar to, because land subsidence doesn't happen right away. It happens after pumping's been occurring for a while. So you remember how all those hydrographs were relatively flat until the mid-90s, and then you saw a big decline. After that decline starts, it takes some time for that compaction to happen. And so when we looked at our rates of subsidence, we have subsidence data going back to 2004. From 2004 to 2013, there was very little land subsidence. The rate of subsidence was minimal, like centimeter per year, like very minor. It was there, but it was very slight. But in the last, since 2013 to 2023, so in that 10-year period, the land subsidence rate has increased year after year. It's actually subsiding more and more each year. So we're kind of in this acceleration phase of subsidence. And as we said before, the reason why that is an indicator of groundwater mining is because you have to remove that water from storage and cause the skeleton of the aquifer, the soil, to compact. So when you see it, it's because the problem's already been occurring. There's one other feature that's related to land subsidence, and that's earth fissures. Earth fissures, people see in the news, they make headlines because they're usually dramatic. And people have asked why are there any earth fissures in Gila Bend? We haven't mapped any yet. Doesn't mean they aren't there, and I'll explain how they form here in a second. But to get earth fissuring, you have to have the land subsidence occurring first, and then you have to have some kind of pediment or local bedrock high in that alluvial basin that causes the formation to not be able to drop uniformly. And I'll show that here in a second. So if this is a hypothetical basin, so bedrock, these are mountains exposed to the surface. These are just different hydrostratigraphic units. And this blue line could be our water table. If we've got something like this, so here's land surface, and you could have wells here that are pumping. This is the groundwater. But if we have like a little ledge or a ridge or some kind of change in the slope of the bedrock, those are actually where earth fissures propagate. And this is how they occur. So we'll zoom in on just this edge of the basin. And this is, of course, just schematic. So if we start pumping and the water level drops, and then let's say because the water level has declined and we've lost groundwater storage, let's say that those units here start to compress. If you've got a ridge here, that section can't go down together anymore. one section is going to continue dropping while the other one's stuck on the bedrock. It gets hung up basically. And when you do that, you get these hairline cracks that propagate up from that bedrock high, that local spot in the bedrock. And those can be really thin hairline, like fractures in that dry alluvium that you can't really see, not at first. So it's very safe to assume that we've got some level of hairline cracking like this happening all throughout Gila Bend right now, but they won't evolve into earth fissures unless a couple other conditions occur. So let's look at those hairline cracks. So we're zooming in again. So when you have land subsidence and it causes the one section to be dropping at a different rate, the other side can't keep up with it because it gets stuck on bedrock or something else, you actually get tension pulling in two different directions. You're kind of starting to pull it, right? So you get lateral stresses. When you do that, you get those hairline tension cracks that form up straight from that point of the bedrock. They can sit there and stay as hairline fractures like that or cracks for a while until you get some surface water, you get rain or something that's coming in from the surface. The rain or surface water will infiltrate the cracks and it'll actually start to wallow it out. So over time, the water will start to kind of wallow out and wash out those cracks and move the sediment further down. And you still wouldn't see an expression at the surface yet of a catastrophic failure of the soil. You still would only see these cracks. It's not until over time, this happens repeatedly, so several rain events, where the cracks underneath open up enough. So another storm comes through, more water's coming through. It's not until you have it happen enough that you've opened the void space below where that earth fissure is that you'll see these cracks just open up at the surface instantaneously during storm events. And they have a couple videos of cracks opening up in real time. And one of them is from like a flip phone from like 15 years ago. So the video quality is not great. But wherever you have these cracks that have been infiltrated with surface water and opened up and eroded out, you will eventually create an earth fissure at the surface. Here's an image of an earth fissure in Hermosillo. It's hard to see, but the drop here is about 25 feet. So it's a pretty decent crack that opened up. It opened up during a rain event, while it was raining one night. And the next morning, the cars could no longer pass that road. And they got stranded, right? Here's one that's in the Harquahala Valley, and you can tell this one's much older because you've got trees growing out of the cracks, and it's not as sharp edged; it's a little rounded. So this earth fissure is, decades old. This one's in Queen Creek. If you notice, the front wheel made it across, but the back wheel didn't. This fissure opened up while the car was driving over it. So that is where property gets damaged, and that is where like things, problems occur, right? Oh, did we lose the slideshow? Teresa?
Teresa.
I think she's working on it. Bear with us. Sorry. All right, we'll see if we can advance it. So this is where the vehicle, the first wheel made it over the crack, but it was opening while they drove over it, and the back wheel fell into the crack and couldn't continue driving. The video you're about to see is from someone standing in this exact same spot, but looking to the right. So the reason why I wanted to show you this photo again Like I said, the quality is not great, but you look at that and say, oh, it's just water that's shedding across my fine-grained silty soil. But in reality, that crack is currently opening up now. It's opening up while this video is being taken. And it's a lot of water that's coming into this crack and then disappearing. So the question is, where's it going? It's because it's already been eroded and opened up underneath. This one might be a bit dark to see, but this is drone footage from the AZGS of a earth fissure. And he's going down and looking into it. But when he starts to fly up and you get a sense of how large the fissure is, this is when the scale or how big they can become is a bit daunting. That earth fissure right there is about 20 feet deep. But if you look, it continues for miles and miles. So to summarize the hydrology portion of this presentation, there have been declines 200 to 300 feet over the last 30 years observed. Land subsidence has been measured and observed, and it's increasing year after year. The rate is what is something that's non-trivial as well. For it to be relatively flat with low subsidence rates, and then since the mid-90s up to the last few decades, the increase in subsidence is significant. Our access to measuring points, so index wells, where we can go and collect those measurements, so we can monitor and measure the water level declines, the subsidence features, anything, has been becoming more and more challenging every year. And that concludes my portion. So that's the sciencey stuff. With that, I'll hand it over to Natalie Mast. Natalie is our AMA director. She'll be going over what initiating an AMA looks like, what are some of the things you guys should be aware of, and get into the weeds a bit.
Yes, thanks, Ryan. All right. So yes, as Ryan said, my name is Natalie Mast. I'm the Active Management Areas Director here at ADWR. I'm going to cover some of the background about what an AMA is and what a process to establish a new AMA might look like if the director initiates those proceedings, and also what the requirements within an AMA include. We do recognize that this is a lot of information. We appreciate your patience as we go through all of this background. I'm going to try to move quickly through this, and we're going to throw a lot at you, but we will have time for questions at the end. Go. All right. So the structure of an AMA was created by the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. That act created the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and it imposes certain regulations statewide and within other types of regulated areas. It also authorized the establishment of new active management areas, either by local election or by designation of the ADWR director. So the structure of the Groundwater Management Act is additive in nature. So what you can see here is that there are some requirements that apply. What was that? Oh no, I was using the pointer. There are some requirements that apply statewide. So statewide, you have to register all wells. There are adequate water supply requirements, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And community water systems have to report their water use annually. In an irrigation non-expansion area, or an INA, there are additional requirements that apply. So those statewide requirements apply, and in addition, you have a prohibition on the expansion of irrigated acreage, and you have measuring and reporting requirements for folks who are using water from a non-exempt well. In an active management area, an AMA, there are still more requirements. So again, additive. All those previous requirements still apply, and we move from adequate water supply to assured water supply requirements. Again, I'll talk about what that means a little bit later. We have management goals, management plans, and mandatory conservation programs. And we have things like groundwater rights, grandfathered rights, withdrawal permits, and requirements around things like well spacing. The initial 1980 Groundwater Management Act created 4 AMAs and 2 INAs. So in 1980, what was created was the Prescott, Phoenix, Pinal, and Tucson AMAs. The Santa Cruz AMA was split out from the footprint of the Tucson AMA in the mid-90s. And so since that footprint has been an AMA since 1980, it is still considered to be an initial AMA. The initial INAs, irrigation non-expansion areas, were Joseph City and the Douglas INA. The Douglas INA was superseded by the AMA, which was established in 2022 by local election. And we have 2 additional INAs. The Harquahela INA was established in 1981 by initiation of the ADWR director, and the Wallapai Valley INA was established again by order of the director in December of 2022. So there are 2 methods to establish a new AMA. What was seen, for example, in the Douglas AMA in 2022 was local initiation. So there's a process by which local folks can submit a petition, and the result of a successful petition is that it goes to a local election. In Douglas, a petition was submitted and went to a vote, and it passed and created the Douglas Active Management Area. In Wilcox, a similar petition was submitted, went to a vote, and that did not pass. So there is not a Wilcox Active Management Area at this time. The other method to create a subsequent AMA is by designation of the director. So the ADWR director may initiate a statutory process that includes a public hearing and public comment, and that culminates with a decision by the ADWR director. I'll talk a little bit more about that process in a little bit here. The statutory criteria that the director has to consider if considering a subsequent AMA is on the screen here. It's that active management practices are necessary to preserve the existing supply of groundwater for future needs, that land subsidence or fishing is endangering property or potential groundwater storage capacity. And number 3, it's the use of groundwater is resulting in actual or threatened water quality degradation. And what I'll note here is that if the director determines that any of these apply, the director may consider establishing a subsequent AMA in that area. We want to emphasize that today's meeting is not an initiation of those formal proceedings. Today's meeting is intended to be an informal meeting to provide background information and to receive comments from you all on whether the director should initiate those proceedings. If those procedures are initiated, beginning on the date that the director provides notice of that initiation, only lands that were irrigated at any time during the 5 years preceding that notice may be irrigated going forward. That prohibition stays in effect until the director makes a final decision on whether to establish an AMA. And if the director decides to establish an AMA, then that prohibition would remain in effect going forward. If the director decides not to establish an AMA in that area, then the prohibition would be lifted at that time. Is it going to go for me? There we go. All right. If designation proceedings are initiated, the director has to hold a public meeting no sooner than 30 days and no later than 60 days after issuing notice of that process. So in that hearing, the director is required to consider whether to designate the area as an active management area and to consider the boundaries and any potential sub-basins of the proposed AMA. At the hearing, the director presents any factual data in his possession in support of that action. And at that time, there is a formal comment period where any person may submit evidence for or against the active management area. The director is required by law to issue written findings from that hearing within 30 days after the hearing. Again, if the director finds that an AMA should be created, the director can at that time issue an order designating the AMA. The director's finding and order are published in a newspaper in circulation in that area once a week for 2 consecutive weeks, and that order is effective when published for the second time. Those findings and order are subject to requests for rehearing and review, and they are subject to judicial review. And there are specific timelines associated with each of those types of appeal. So I know I ran through a whole bunch of legal sounding language really quickly there. This is kind of a high level overview of all of that. So if proceedings are initiated, ADWR would issue notice of those proceedings. Within 30 to 60 days after that, we would hold a hearing. Within 30 days of the hearing, we would issue findings and could at that time issue a decision. If the decision is that that an AMA is designated, the irrigation prohibition would remain in effect at that time. If an AMA is not designated, then the irrigation prohibition would at that time be lifted. If a new AMA is initiated and ultimately created, you can see on the screen here kind of a listing of things that would have to be created in order to establish the structures around that active management area. The list here is not comprehensive, but does show some of the items and can provide a reference for some of the statutory language for each item. So ADWR would establish a goal and would work toward developing and adopting a management plan. We would create processes for the submission and processing of applications for grandfathered rights. And we would begin the development of groundwater models and development of rules for AMA-specific requirements for assured water supply. We will talk in more detail about a lot of these things as we go through the rest of this presentation and how each of these would play out in a new AMA. I do want to note here on the bottom here, and it might be a little bit hard for some of you to see, that withdrawal fees is crossed out here. Withdrawal fees are not authorized by statute in subsequent AMAs. So the Douglas AMA, for example, does not have withdrawal fees associated with groundwater pumping there. Oops, there we go. Okay. In a subsequent AMA, only lands irrigated in the 5 years preceding the notice of the initiation of proceedings. So if we go back to that process, the notice initiates those formal proceedings. That 5-year period starts on the date that that notice would go out. If an active management area would be designated under those proceedings, only lands irrigated in the 5 years prior to that initiation would allow to be irrigated going forward with any water. The definition of irrigation is really important here. So irrigate for the purpose of an active management area is defined as applying water to 2 or more acres of land to produce plants or parts of plants for sale or consumption. So something like grass in a lawn is not defined as irrigation, but something like a cornfield would be defined as irrigation. So irrigation is a really specific definition there, and when we talk about irrigation, that's what we're discussing here. There are two exceptions to this prohibition on the expansion of irrigated acres. Excuse me. The first exception is land that is irrigable by previously established surface water rights. And the second exception is what we call substantial capital investment. So if someone is deemed to have made substantial capital investment to bring that land into irrigation, ADWR can consider that land to be eligible to be irrigated going forward. That is a very fact-intensive and a case-by-case analysis. And it's not something that ADWR is able to provide advice on or make determinations about ahead of time. Well drilling is one of our things that applies statewide. So do note here that the requirements regarding well drilling, well registration, and well construction standards apply both inside and outside active management areas. So everywhere in the state, before drilling, deepening, or replacing a well, a person has to must file a notice of intent to drill. That well has to be drilled by a licensed well driller. There's certain construction standards, and you have to submit certain documentation after the drilling of the well. For exempt wells anywhere in the state, impacts on other wells are not considered. Inside active management areas, non-exempt wells may be subject to well spacing requirements to ensure that those wells are not having an unreasonable impact on the wells surrounding them. So what do I mean by exempt and non-exempt? This slide has a lot of text on it. I'll repeat a lot of this to make sure it's clear. Very generally, on an exempt well, a person may withdraw groundwater for a non-irrigation use, so all of those definitions that I listed out earlier, for a non-irrigation use from a well having a pump with a maximum pump capacity of 35 gallons per minute or less. If you're withdrawing water from an exempt well, you are not required to have a right or a permit, and you are not required to have a groundwater authority in an active management area. There are some limitations though. Only one exempt well may be used at the same location to serve the same water use. And withdrawals from exempt wells for a non-irrigation purpose are generally limited to 10 acre-feet per year with some exceptions. For a non-exempt well, so if a well is greater than 35 gallons per minute pump capacity, or it is irrigating 2 or more acres of land, or it is using 10 or more acre-feet of water for a non-irrigation use. If it checks any of those 3 boxes, it's a non-exempt well. And in an active management area, someone using an exempt well is required to hold a right or a permit to withdraw water from that well. Sorry, non-exempt well, I misspoke. I'll say that again. Thank you. In an AMA, someone using a non-exempt well, which is 35 gallons per minute or more, irrigating 2 or more acres of land, or using 10 or more acre-feet of water for a non-irrigation use, that non-exempt well user is required to have a groundwater right or permit to withdraw that water. So just to emphasize that, because I know there's a lot of information there. In order for something to be classified as an exempt well, so when we say exempt, we're referring to that well being exempt from requirements to have a groundwater authority and requirements to measure and report on that well. An exempt well has to check all 3 boxes, which is its pump capacity is 35 gallons per minute or less, it is using less than 10 acre-feet of water, and it is not irrigating 2 or more acres of land. And if you can check all of those boxes, that well is exempt from having to obtain a grandfathered right or withdrawal authority. It's exempt from any requirements to measure or report, and it's exempt from any conservation requirements in a management plan for that active management area. That well is still required to register that well and document any modifications or changes to well ownership. Not there. Right. Non-exempt wells are required to measure and report their water use, with a very, very few exceptions. Folks withdrawing groundwater from a non-exempt well are required to have a grandfathered right or withdrawal permit, and they're required to measure their withdrawals with an approved measuring device and report that groundwater use to ADWR on an annual basis. Annual reports for active management areas are due to ADWR on March 31st of each year. In this year's case, March 31st falls on a Sunday, so we're actually pushing that to April 1st. An application or for a permit to drill a new non-exempt well in an AMA will be denied if that well would be shown to cause unreasonably increasing damage to other well users. So that's what we refer to as a well impact analysis. So a new non-exempt well in an AMA is required to have a well impact analysis in order to drill that well. In an active management area, there are multiple different types of groundwater rights and withdrawal authorities. The three types of grandfathered rights that we have are an irrigation grandfathered right, and a type 1 non-irrigation grandfathered right, and a type 2 non-irrigation grandfathered right. So that irrigation grandfathered right is issued based on historic irrigation. So this would be issued based on that 5-year history of irrigating 2 or more acres of land. A type 1 non-irrigation grandfathered right is issued based on retirement of acres from irrigation. That non-irrigation grandfathered right can be issued for a maximum of 3 acre-feet per acre, but it may be less depending on the historic use on that acreage. A type 2 non-irrigation grandfathered right is based on historic non-irrigation uses. So if someone is using water for a dairy, for example, or some other type of non-irrigation use prior to the establishment of an AMA, we would look at that same 5-year period. That historic use can be documented, and that person could apply for a type 2 non-irrigation grandfathered right. This is a very flexible type of right. So it can only be used for non-irrigation purposes, but it can be, in this case, sold separately from the land, where the irrigation grandfathered right and the type 1s cannot be sold separately from the land. This type of right can be leased. So if the owner of the right is not using the entire quantity of that right, they could lease a portion, all or a portion of it, to someone else for that use. Substantial capital investment. So if an AMA is created, property owners who believe they may qualify for consideration of substantial capital investment can apply for that consideration as a part of applying for their grandfathered rights. Acres of land can be considered for substantial capital investment if that investment was made in the 5-year period preceding the initiation of proceedings. And it's specifically for, the language here is for the subjugation of such land for an irrigation use. So investments made to bring that land into irrigation within that 5-year period may be considered as a part of an application for one of those grandfathered rights. Again, substantial capital investment is a very case-by-case thing. We're not going to be able to answer a lot of questions about that, unfortunately. It is something that is very fact-intensive, and that's something that is very case-by-case analysis. There are other types of groundwater withdrawal permits. And these are types of permits that are different than grandfathered rights. These are permits that can be issued after the establishment of an active management area. Some typical types of withdrawal permits that exist are hydrologic testing permits, poor quality groundwater permits that may be used to control groundwater contamination, for example, mineral extraction or drainage and dewatering permits, and general industrial use permits. Service area rights are also another type of withdrawal authority in an active management area. And this type of right allows a municipal water provider, for example, to deliver water within their service area. That water use may still be subject to conservation requirements under a management plan. In an active management area, assured water supply requirements also apply. I'll move through this pretty quickly because I know we want to get to the comment time. Very, very generally, adequate water supply applies statewide in most areas outside of the active management areas. Adequate water supply in most areas is a notification step. So a water report may be issued for a new subdivision. That water report can indicate that there is adequate water supply or there is not adequate water supply. That is a notification step. It's not a permitting step. Assured water supply is different. You have a couple of additional criteria that you need to meet. So in adequate water supply, it's physical, legal, continuous availability, financial capability, and quality. In assured water supply, the criteria for analyzing those first 5 qualifications are a little bit more stringent. And you also have to meet consistency with the management plan and the management goal. Inside the active management areas, assured water supply is a permitting step. So you are required to get a determination of assured water supply before you would be able to build a new subdivision. In active management areas, you also have management goals, management plans, and conservation programs. And this is a lot of what a lot of people think about when they think about the requirements in an active management area. The management goal is really an overarching guidance statement that says where we're trying to go with this active management area. The management plan is a tool that helps talk about how the AMA is structured and what types of actions we're going to take to move toward that goal. And the conservation programs are our mechanism. So the conservation programs are designed to reduce withdrawals of groundwater in order to move that active management area toward its goal. The conservation programs are mandatory conservation requirements on groundwater users. So agricultural, municipal, and industrial water users are required to comply with the conservation requirements that are adopted in a management plan. In a subsequent active management area, the director would propose a management goal for the AMA and the number of years in which the goal is to be achieved, and would be required to hold a hearing and accept public comment on that management goal. The director is also required to promulgate an initial management plan for a subsequent active management area within 2 years of the establishment of that active management area. And at that time can also provide for subsequent management plans after that first management plan. The adoption of that management plan would also go through a similar hearing process and public comment process. All right, with that, I know we threw a lot of information at you. I will hand things back off to Lainey for additional logistics, and we'll start our public comment time.
Thank you, Ryan and Natalie, for those presentations. As a reminder, ADWR is seeking comments regarding the Gila Bend groundwater basin as the director considers whether to initiate proceedings to designate the basin as an active management area. To ensure that everyone who wishes to speak has the opportunity, ADWR may limit time for each speaker. Larger groups wishing to present the same message are encouraged to designate a single representative. If you have not already done so and wish to speak, please fill out a speaker card, either virtually or physically, and return it to the ADWR staff located in the back of the room. Please come to the microphone at the podium here to ask your question, and this will allow those on the webinar to hear and participate fully. When you step to the microphone to speak, if you would like to share if you are a resident of the basin or any other affiliation, you are welcome to do so at that time. We will call people up in the order that we received cards, alternating between those in person with those online. Public comments not presented today can be sent to Sharon Scantleberry by 5 p.m. on February 2nd, 2024, and her business cards are located at the table in the back of the room. So to begin, the first individual would be Shannon Easterday. If you would like to come to the front of the room and present any comments or questions that you have at this time. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shannon Easterday. I'm originally from Yuma, Arizona. My family farms on an area known as the Island. You may be familiar with that. It butts up against the Colorado River, just between Yuma, Arizona and Bard, California. The first time I ever attended a water meeting was in 1964 in Yuma, when Barry Goldwater met with the farmers to discuss the water issues that had been occurring in the state since 1923. It's exactly 60 years later. We had hoped this moment didn't happen. I'm really appreciative to the committee, the department, for explaining the importance and the value of educating everybody about how our land is subsiding. That is something that farmers have been discussing for a long time. My question is this. It always seems like farmers bear the brunt of water conservation. As somebody who spent my early years in Yuma, but I spent over 35 years in Tucson, we always noticed that Tucson did a lot to educate the general public about water conservation, and Maricopa County was silent. I still see that happening today. And as a farm kid, that still brings me some concern. So my question is this: as we move into AMAs, Yuma is not in that, if I'm correct, and yet we are installing meters on our wells, and that data is beginning to be collected at this time, correct? Or will be soon?
It's not mandatory that I'm aware of.
Well, we've installed that equipment, and we are eager to see those numbers start rolling into your department.
I'm eager to see that too.
And the reason for that is a question that I was asked to come tonight and present. And that question is, are farmers in the state of Arizona going to start seeing water credits for the returns on the water, meaning that water that processes through the fields and returns naturally through the soil and is filtered and returns to our aquifers?
Are you asking if you'll be able to see that in the water level data?
In the water level data, and whether farmers will actually be credited. I mean, there's so much public scrutiny on how much water we're using. That's public scrutiny is going up. And because we don't really have a great tool in the state of Arizona for reaching all public entities, meaning voters, how do we talk about that as farmers, as a group in and participating in an AMA and in future AMAs? Will we be credited and receive recognition? Because if 90% of the water is returning to the aquifers, then that's something that a lot of voters are not aware of.
If 90% of water pumped is being returned to the aquifer, then the aquifer level would stay consistent and it wouldn't be declining. And that would be how you would see it, or at least how you'd be able to observe it. As far as credits go, that's not a hydrology question. That's more of a policy question.
Okay.
I can maybe take the second part of that. At this time, there are not any statutory structures within active management areas to assign credits or anything like that for things like incidental recharge.
If that happens in Gila Bend, would anybody that's still allowed to farm there, would they be able to get a water credit?
There are not existing statutory structures that would allow for that.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, there's no mechanism in which to do that at this moment.
Okay. I'm curious to know how many farmers are actually here from Maricopa, Yuma? About 85, 90%. And of those, how many of you are from the Gila Bend area? Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Mark Aguirre. Thank you for the correction.
So I just had a couple questions. Is the director here?
The ADWR director is not present tonight, but we'll be providing him feedback from tonight's meeting.
So you talk about that it's hard to get on our places to monitor the wells. Maybe there's a reason. If the director can't even, be here in person, how am I supposed to know that the director even cares? The next question, shouldn't an AMA be last resort?
I think that's a value question. I think what I'm able to answer tonight is what are the statutory structures and what are the processes available to ADWR.
Because to gain our trust, you're not giving us any options. Nobody's come around to us and said, hey, we want to help you be more efficient in your irrigating. Anyone? Ever? But yet, you want to holler at us that we're using too much of the water. Well, how can we use less when our margins are so tight already that we can't afford to be more efficient? Especially someone like me.
We appreciate that comment. We understand that these issues are challenging. The intent of an active management area is to address areas where there are substantial water level declines. Sometimes those conservation requirements require folks to invest. But at the same time, there are also considerations within an active management area that requires us to make sure that any requirements that would go into place would be reasonable and achievable for a specific area. The conservation requirements in an active management area are intended to be customizable. And so there would be a process in developing a management plan that would allow for some consideration of what the local conditions are and how folks can move toward reducing withdrawals of groundwater in order to address declines that may be seen in the area.
The other question that I did have is, I heard you talk about substantial capital investment. What's the dollar amount?
It's a really good question, and it's not one that we're able to answer, not because I don't want to, but because there is not a dollar amount. It is a case-by-case analysis and takes into consideration a lot of different factors, any of the facts that we're able to consider related to the individual case.
Okay. Just one last comment is, I'm not with a group. I know some folks here. I don't really talk to anyone much, right? The only way I found out about this meeting was because I stumbled upon it on the internet from AZ Central. No one from your guys' department left a notice at my place, tried to get in contact with this at all. I've never had any of you try and contact about getting into our place, wanting to install some things to monitor the water levels. So I think maybe if there's a little bit more transparency, that we're willing to work with you, but we got to be able to trust you first. And when you don't even let the town of Gila Bend know about this meeting, there's no transparency there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Roy Pierpoint.
My name's Roy Pierpoint. My family's farmed in the Hill Bend area since 1948. My dad moved here from California. At that time, it was all desert, mesquite trees, no roads. He made Pierpoint Road. And since then, we have been through floods. Water table at that time was 18 feet. Then it dropped to 120 or so, then back up, depending on the water flow. But all I can see an AMA would do for us at this time was make a tight situation on budgets tighter, because you'd have to put the meters on the well and whatever else you need to collect the money or whatever for the reporting. And also, how would you increase the water supply? Because used to, we had 50,000 acre feet a year recharged to the basin and approximately 350,000 acre feet pumped out. But now, since the flood control district has initiated all these retention ponds, we are down to about 10,000. So essentially, the flood control district is helping dry up our basin. So how would that help us get any more water in our basin from the AMA? Because to get an equal balance, we'd have to stop pumping about 240,000 acre feet a year to just maintain the level. So anyway, that's the question I have. What would we benefit from the AMA besides more paperwork, more expense? So that's about all I have, is tell me how it would benefit us. Thank you.
So what I'll say is that you can't manage what you don't measure, right? That's kind of the first step. If you want to try to implement any kind of conservation plans or management plans to help an aquifer system recover or rebound, you have to kind of know what you're looking at first, right? So for my response from a hydrology standpoint, I'll let the policy folks speak to the policy. But collecting the data and knowing what the trends are and implementing conservation plans to reverse the trends. That's remember what the department's goal is. The goal of the TWR is to safeguard the water for generations to come, right? So our intent in all the work that we do is to conserve our resources, our water resources.
Next up, Wade Akamazo.
Hello, for those that don't know me, I'm Wade Akamazo. I'm a fourth generation farmer. family started farming in the SRP, moved west of Buckeye, and now farm in Gila Bend. So we have a long history in the valley, and a very unique situation because we have been both part of an AMA for the last 44 years and about ready to get a potential another one slammed down our throats, which may or may not be a good thing. Concerns that I have, and I would just want to share, first and foremost with the intent or potential intent to establish an AMA, was that there are certain good things and there's certain bad things that have been, within the AMA over the years that have been figured out and understood. I believe Senator Kerr's BMP program that she's initiated in Senate Bill 1221 has helped to figure out what the disadvantages and the advantages are from a stakeholder perspective, not only from agriculture, but from other industries as well. First and foremost, to echo what Ms. Easterday said, it's not necessarily 90% recharge. I think she misspoke on that. But in the Salt River project, we get delivered an acre foot of water. We get charged an acre foot of water to DWR for our water allotment, but our tailwater leaves our farm and it goes back into the system and we don't get a credit for that. Now that tailwater is 30–40%, but I have a field downstream that I order water again and I get delivered again and I get charged for that same tailwater that I just gave back to the system again when it comes to my allotment. So that is one issue when it comes to the actual metering of the water and getting a credit for the water that returning back to the system, maybe not just recharge, but actual tailwater. The 5-year, going back 5 years and looking at, cropping patterns and what you used for 5 years, that's great. You take an arbitrary deal. Nobody has a chance to ramp up for it. Nobody has a chance to, plan for it. In the 75 to 79 timeframe before the 1980 Groundwater Act, there were certain farmers grew a lot of hay, certain farmers had cotton, certain farmers participated in set-aside ground where they didn't grow anything on that ground for 2 out of the 5 years because of the government program. But they pooled that water over the course of 5 years, or 3 years worth of use, and divided it by 5. So you have some lands that have a water duty of 3 acre-feet per acre, and other lands that have a water duty of 6 and 7 and 8, just depending on their cropping pattern and how they ran their operation. So when it comes to that, those are certain things that we can look back and see issues that transpired back then, figured out what went wrong, and then look at that. I think one of the issues in Senator Kerr's bill is that we look at the top 3 out of 5 years or something. That's just a compromise. That's something to take a look at and figure out what we can do. To go a little bit more on what Mr. Pierpoint said, upstream is an issue. And I'm sorry, I forget your name. Ryan?
Ryan Mitchell. Yep.
The modeling that you presented is very, very consistent all the way up until 1993. It flows up and down, here and there. The Gila Bend area actually pumped a lot more water years ago. Eventually, as the land became non-profitable or whatever, a lot of the acres have gone away. The issue that has happened, and I was there, Ron will probably speak to it, is in the flood when Gillespie Dam broke. I flew that river. There's 1 million acre-feet behind Painted Rock Dam, just in that one deal. The subsequent response to that was raising Roosevelt Dam 77 feet. And in doing so, spent years filling up that reservoir. And for the last 30 years, we haven't got the flow coming down the river because it's been stored upstream. Now, when there's talk about raising Bartlett Dam, that's going to be an additional problem for us because we can't recharge as we're pulling out if we're being robbed of our upstream replenishment that's been coming to us for 100 years plus because of things that have been happening, upstream, holding back the water that normally would come and replenish our, our district or our aquifer. And those are things that in your modeling don't show. Put raising 77 feet on Roosevelt Dam in 1995 and see what happens the last 30 years. I mean, it's really, it shows what's not coming down the river. The AMA in 1980 created, and in some cases created its own problem, is because it gave value to land that had no value. It allowed people to go and build in the desert and get your assured water supply from some other source on paper to be able to build in the desert that did not have a historical use of water, before. When Ms. Easterday spoke up as well, as far as saying, where does ag get the credit? Ag's the one who ends up sacrificing the water in our conservation by getting rid of our farm ground, either by conservation or actually selling and retiring the IGFRs, credit, and that gets spread around to land that has never used it before. So we have to look at all of those measures in it to see that an AMA in some ways actually screwed up Phoenix and screwed up our basin below because it prevented flow from coming down to save water, to give value to land that had no value. And for that, I'll pass on. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to give some of the folks online a chance to speak. Is Mary McGilcuddy online? Would you like to speak?
Yes, I'm still here. Yes, I just wanted to say thank you for really helpful visualizations on this. One of my questions that you do or do not have to answer now is whether
Mary McGilcuddy?
I think I hear someone's voice.
Oh,
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can't hear it in the conference room, but we're going to see if we can get that fixed.
thank you. Bear with us, folks. Thank you. Yeah, let's do that. Thank you. Jerry Rovey. Folks online, just bear with us.
You have a microphone?
No, they,
And what I
Is a boundary mic present? I'm hoping this one does not cause feedback issues, but it will be lower in the room. Should be on, it should be glowing green and be unmuted.
Testing.
But you will have to talk louder for the folks in the room to hear you. Folks online will hear you
Can
loud.
y'all hear me good now? No? Is this better? Okay. Modern technology, and I'm challenged in the technology world. I'm Jerry Rovey. I'm president of the Paloma Irrigation District. And thank Wade for saying what I wanted to say, so I'm going to change the subject up a little bit. My grandparents came to Arizona in 1912. And we've been in the valley for how many years? That's a bunch. And you take a footprint of the valley and the Arizona Canal on the north and the other canal on the south was Salt River Valley. And that was fed by the water out of the Salt River. And what they didn't use went on down to the Gila area. We were moved out of Phoenix on 19th Avenue and Bethany Home Road in 1950. And we were moved out of 75th Avenue and Camelback. Maryville came along. We moved out of there in 1961. Since then, we've been in Roosevelt Irrigation District in Buckeye ever since, and we also have land down at Paloma Ranch. The elephant in the room is the watershed above us, that we depend on some recharge. Bartlett Dam, we will be opposed to that. Roosevelt Dam, they raised it as Wade mentioned a while ago. I'm going to get off that subject, but my other question would be, if there's a petition to form a AMA, who gets to vote? Landowners or
I
residents?
believe it's the residents within the boundaries of the what would be the AMA.
Okay,
And what I'll clarify there is that today what we're discussing is consideration. We're asking for comments on whether the ADWR director should initiate proceedings to designate the Gila Bend as an active management area. That particular process would not go to a local vote. If there was a local petition, then that process would go to a vote within the basin, but a process initiated by the director would not go to a local vote.
And just to clarify, it'd be registered voters who reside within the area.
so all of our growers, all of my growers in Paloma, 99% of the landowners would not have a say.
As a part of a process initiated by the director, there would be a public hearing and opportunity for additional public comment. And the director would consider those public comments as a part of making a decision on that process.
Okay, but instead he's being directed by the governor to do this without anybody having to say about it.
There are statutory processes and criteria that the director is required to consider as a part of that process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to circle back to the folks online. Mary McGilcuddy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? I saw thumbs up, so I'm going to keep going. I just wanted to say thank you for the helpful visualizations.
Mary,
Explaining
we
what's
can't hear you, so give us just a moment. Okay, can you try again, Mary?
Yes, can you hear me now? Anything? Hear me now? Anything now?
Mary, can you try again?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay,
Go ahead,
great.
Mary.
Very quickly, thank you for the helpful visualizations on what's happening in the basin. I was curious if the AMA designation opens up any funding opportunities, be it federal or state, to help farmers install water efficiency controls or techniques or technology.
It's a really good question. I am not specifically familiar with any particular funding opportunities, but perhaps that's something we can follow up on in writing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is Michael Evans online?
Yes, I was just asking when and where this information will be published.
Michael, were you asking where the presentation and recording will be stored after the
Yes.
meeting? Yes, they will be available on ADWR's website.
Thank you.
Thank you. Going back to folks in the room, Jerry Rovey. I'm sorry, John Howard, excuse me.
Can you hear me? I'm John Howard, Graham County Board of Supervisors, and also I was a cotton farmer in the Gila Valley. I retired in 2014. I was a cotton farmer in the Gila Valley up till 2014 when I retired, and then I become a Graham County Supervisor. So I sympathize with each and every one of you in this room. I quit cotton farming. One of the main reasons was the problems we was having with water in the Gila River with the litigation with the tribes. We are already restricted to 6 acre-foot of water pumping, whether it's groundwater or surface water. Our wells, of course, in the impact zone are monitored by meters that we put on as expense of the farmers. Each well that I had 17 wells. The minimum cost, the beginning cost was $1,500 a meter way back in 2006, 5, something like that. I paid as much as $6,000 on some of my wells to get them in compliance. That cost was tremendous to my business, hurt tremendously. But on the other hand, I had a question to talk about your water credits. We tried in Graham County to have a pump back system with our water, our tailwater. It's not allowed in the agreement with the tribes. So that was out the door. We tried lining our ditches to conserve water. Couldn't do that. That was out the door because they didn't want us to do that. So my question is, conservation that's preached to all of us out here on conservation of water, we are limited to it. But the cost of it, farmers are the biggest conservationists they are. Each and every one of these guys do everything in the world to save water. But then laws come in or roadblocks come in and stops them from doing it. It's absurd. But the Gila River, again, we're not in this AMA, but I just fear that it's coming down. And what I understand is there's a bill being dropped saying that we possibly could have a statewide blanket AMA. That is absurd. What's good for one aquifer is not good for the other aquifer. I will never accept that. We're all individuals. And another thing, with this council, the governor is trying to create, from what I understand, I hope my facts are true, that there are 3 appointed by her, 2 by legislators, 1 Senate of each of the parties, Democrat, Republicans. ADWR gets 1, I think, and then the county board would get 3. But it's on approval of the governor. I do not want the governor or anybody else to come to Graham County and appoint somebody that does not know our situation. Our cities, our city of Safford has agreement with the tribe that's solid on water. Our water we have enough regulations. We are regulated to the hilt. We do not need any more regulations there. These folks, I don't think they need to be regulated anymore. I see them, they're worried about their livelihood. Farmers are the first one in this state gets hacked with water. Pull back, pull back. They feed all of us. They feed you, they feed the whole state. But yet they are the first ones that get hammered. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Ronald Rayner.
I haven't said anything yet. I'll tell you, I was taking a few notes and I am somewhat curious. I guess I should identify myself. This is Ronald Rayner. I am a farmer out in the West Valley, on down to the Gila Bend Basin. One of the things that, as Wade was speaking, kind of piqued my interest a little bit. Is there any groundwater in the Gila Bend Basin that's considered surface water? We know that there's young alluvium along the edges of that. That's where the subsidence is occurring, is it not?
The subsidence is occurring in the
I don't hear
subsidence is
very-
occurring in a lot larger area than just near the surface stream flow. It's occurring for miles and miles in all directions. That there's a figure that shows it. But groundwater and surface water are not regulated the same. And my hydrographs that I was showing were specifically the aquifers, the groundwater.
But there's not been any area inside the Gila Bend Basin that groundwater has been denoted as surface water. Is that right? Or do you know?
Not sure I understand the question entirely. So no,
Well, we know that up on the Verde River, there's a substantial
oh,
area
I think you're
on
speaking
either side
the
that
adjudication.
in that area, any groundwater is surface water.
That has not been delineated for Gila Bend, but are they in the adjudication?
I don't believe that area has been adjudicated at this point.
Is Dave Brown in the room? You know, one of the things when Roy was speaking, it made me wonder, you know, Roy, you're pumping water out of a well from 1947. And if the legal description of water in the young alluvium can be surface water, you may have a right that precedes that water that's being held in Roosevelt Dam. Maybe we need to start doing some legal investigations here and really take a look at some of this stuff. I mean, and there are a lot of other people and wells that would predate the 1997 or whatever, you know, actions further upstream. And it would certainly predate any actions that come up on Bartlett. So the problem that we have is substantiating a right to continue to receive the surface water that used to come into the Gila Bend Basin. So, you know, it was replaced. The river flows were eventually replaced by affluent flows. Then some drainage water flows out of Buckeye. So for a long time, water continued to arrive into that basin, but it's really declined. And you've seen what's happened with lack of rainfall and snow. So there's been a period of time now when no water got into that basin. You can really see it in the hydrograph. And one of the things you need to look at in that, it looks rather dramatic when it falls, that, you know, extensive period. And make no mistake, I'm worried about water levels declining, but it's exaggerated by the fact that filling that 1,000,000 acre feet in 1993 probably overfilled that aquifer, and you could see that from those peaks. Then where that fall was much greater had it been just a level, you know, level period of time for the water levels. So then when it fell from a higher level, that was basically an overfill condition, it created an exaggerated rate of decline. So, but make no mistake, we're still worried about it. We don't want to see that kind of decline. One of the things that I am curious about too is you mentioned in the subsequent AMA about the water duty, how they are established. And my son was telling me he thought it was by what you could demonstrate that you used. Is that correct, or how do you determine it?
So in the initial AMAs, water duties were established based on an amount of water that would reasonably be able to be used to grow the crops that were historically grown on those acres, historically being defined. as
Natalie,
that
you should know better.
period.
That was not how they did it. Really?
So
They used the crop records that we submitted to the DWR, what crop we planted in each of those years. Then they used Leonard Airy's 1947 lysimeter results to determine the consumptive use of each one of those plants. And then he applied a 65% application efficiency to that to create the water duties then that we were issued for each of our blocks of irrigation grandfathered
Right.
rights.
So it's a consumptive use value with an assigned irrigation efficiency.
Yeah.
Correct.
Based on what the crop was that you grew.
Based on that 5-year crop
Yeah.
history. Yes.
And now for the subsequent AMA, how's it
The-
going to work?
The method for establishing the water duty in a subsequent AMA would be determined as a part of that first management plan and any subsequent management plan for that matter. And generally would follow that same pattern where that water duty would be based on an amount that would reasonably be able to be used to grow the crops historically grown on those acreages. So similar type of structure.
So everybody would plant wall-to-wall alfalfa to get the highest water duty you could have. I mean, if it's after the fact, that's what's going to happen, I guarantee it.
It would be based on that 5-year crop history.
Okay. You know, I'm getting tired. It's late. Sorry. I appreciate your time and the description. So I worry about the AMA disadvantaging our basin because of the upstream conditions, or that's what's really causing the water tables to fall more so than our actual pumpage. Certainly it's being pumped out, but we're not getting what we're supposed to be getting as far as flows down the river. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to note that we're nearing 8 o'clock. So we'd like to get as many more comments as we can. So if folks can try to limit themselves to maybe a minute to 3 minutes, that would be very helpful so we can hear from as many of you as possible, at least this evening. Of course, we will be accepting additional comments after this evening. So Sean Kerr, if you could come up next, please.
You know what, I wanted to yield my time to a member of the public. I'm an elected official.
Thank you. Who would you like to lend your time to?
Just
Oh,
the next
to the
person
next
that was
individual. I
presented.
understand. Okay, thank you. Then that would be Elizabeth McClure.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth McClure. I do not need a mic and I don't want germs. Sorry, no offense to anybody. My question is,
Ms. McClure, I'm sorry, for people to hear you online, you need to use your microphone.
all right, that'll be fine. Okay, online people, here I am. Anyway, I hope I don't scream in your ears. Anyway, I am a third generation Gila Bend resident, not a farmer, not a business owner. My family, my grandfather was a farmer at Theba Ranch, where my mother was born and my family was born. And her family, her siblings were born. But I am third generation resident. My first question is, how many of those farming in Gila Bend are living in Gila Bend? Okay, there's maybe 7 of you, 8 of you out of all the rest of you. Okay, the second thing is all of the talk is about how this all affects the farmers. No offense to you guys, I'm not here I'm not picking sides. I'm a resident and Gila Bend is my heart. It's not my business. And what about the residents and business owners who live and work there? Because the water level is affecting Gila Bend. That's the name you're using, the Gila Bend Basin, which is Gila Bend. And I understand all the different things, but and it's interesting that the numbers showed 95. The numbers started going down in 95. Well, that's the year I came back to Arizona. So since then, it's not just the farmers. Since then, all the development in Buckeye has grown outrageously. Tonopah's grown outrageously. The businesses have come in. All the other people that are taking the businesses and the warehouses and all of that that are taking away the water, the people of the residents and the business owners of Gila Bend are the ones that are going to suffer the consequence of those things that are happening, not just from the farmers. It's there's a whole lot of things that are involved in this. And then the third question is, are you going to have a meeting in the town of Gila Bend to give the residents and business owners an opportunity to hear this information, since it is affecting and will affect them? And I don't know if the town manager who is here and some council members who are here knew of the situation about the Gila Bend water depletion or going down. I can't imagine how the state department, I think the way it goes is the state does its job and it lets the communities know the situation, and then the community leaders let the people and the businesses know. That's my understanding. But I am concerned for the town of Gila Bend and its existence. That's the bottom line to me. And what are changes that need to be made to help Gila Bend stay Gila Bend and let it, as small as it is, let it be there. 100 years ago, the farming, everything's different from 100 years of farming and the water. All of that is different. It's changed so much in 100 years. So something has to change. And I hear you farmers say things have been changing. The AMA has been trying to change, but whatever's happening is not working.
Beth,
So I'm praying you all find a balance somewhere to save the town of Gila Bend and the community of Gila Bend and the residents and the businesses of Gila Bend. That's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Lainey. For at least one part of that, I did want to say, if the director initiates formal proceedings, a hearing on related to those formal proceedings would be held within the Gila Bend Basin.
Next, Greg Tatham.
thank you very much. Mr. Roby, nice hearing from you as well. I represent Enterprise Ranch, and I have a very simple question. And that is, at what level does subflow end? And at what level does the aquifer begin?
So that's unfortunately a question that can only be decided by the court when completing the adjudication of the stream rights. Yes. So once the general stream adjudication has been adjudicated, the court in the adjudication would decide that very question. So unfortunately, right now, we don't know.
But that does require a subflow study, does it not?
I'm sure it would. And usually the court would order that from ADWR when it is adjudicating that portion of the stream.
Why wouldn't that happen prior to going into an AMA?
The adjudications and an AMA process are separate from each other. For example, the Phoenix AMA has some areas that have not yet been fully adjudicated, and that area is an AMA. Same with the Santa Cruz active management area. It is something that the regulations are able to work within each other, within the boundaries of each other. And as the adjudication process would move along, we could respond to that appropriately within the boundaries of, within the framework of an active management area.
Okay. So one of the slides that you presented earlier had to do with this draining of the aquifer and what happens to the soil, and that you can't, quote, recharge that. Why is it then required to recharge in an active AMA?
So to clarify, if there's inelastic compression of the soil, it can't, by definition, it cannot bounce back to its original shape. That's what the inelasticity part means. So that was a schematic diagram illustrating what land subsidence is, how it occurs, and how even if you were to refill that portion of the aquifer, it would not raise the land surface back up.
So what then happens to all the water that's recharged into an active AMA?
It will recharge, but you're still at a deficit, right? You're not adding more than is being pumped out. So you're kind of trying to keep up with how much you're depleting, but you're still having a net negative, right? So if you were to cease all pumping in an area that's experienced a lot of land subsidence and you let enough time go by for the equilibrium of the system to go back into place, so hundreds, if not thousands of years, the water table would actually be physically higher because the soil would not reinflate with water, right? That's the purpose of showing why land subsidence is significant, is because it cannot be reversed if it's in the inelastic sediments.
So it just basically creates a shallower aquifer.
It lowers the elevation of the land surface, and so depth of water would be different.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're going to check in with folks online. Is Trisha G ready to speak? Trisha G, are you online and ready to speak? How about Lila Yango? Lila Yango? Jennifer Martin? Jennifer Martin? How about Sean Wood?
Your great reflection on the
Sean, if this is Sean Wood, we are having trouble hearing you. It's coming across a little jumbled.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect, yes.
All right. Sean Wood, we farm in the Arlington area and Buckeye area, so within an AMA. But there's one thing I think that needs to be stated, and I'd like for you to kind of clarify it for those that are in the room. And that is when you're in the AMA, it's a reported water right that you receive. And theoretically, you think that right would stay with the water when it's transferred, when the property transfers. If you buy property that has water rights, it transfers with the property. However, one of the, I think, major critical errors of an AMA is that in a conservation effort, if you were to set land out for longer than 5 years, you lose that water right. Essentially, DWR swipes it clean, and you do not have the ability to convert that to a type 1 water right. Can you please speak to that to those that are in the room so they have an understanding of what that looks like?
So maybe a point of correction there. For an irrigation grandfathered right, there is no use it or lose it principle, if you will. For a groundwater irrigation grandfathered right, if you happen to fallow a given field or happen to fallow an IGFR for 5 or more years, you could still begin farming that irrigation grandfathered right. There may be some provisions associated with, oh boy, there are some provisions associated with then retiring that for through different mechanisms to a type 1 or 2 extinguishment credits. But if that land, if you sold that IGFR and you hadn't been farming it for 5 years, the new owner would still be allowed to use that irrigation grandfathered right going forward. That doesn't automatically go away in any way.
So just to clarify, if you have a 40-acre tract and you had a 40 acres of irrigated grandfathered water rights, and let's say 2 acres of it had sat out for 5 years, when you transfer it, that full 40-acre grandfathered water right will transfer.
If the full 40 acres was authorized to be irrigated when the IGFR was issued, that would transfer with the land, yes.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. And I'm being told that Jennifer Martin is still online. Jennifer, would you like to speak? Okay, how about Catherine Martin? Catherine Martin? Shelley Gordon? Okay, we're gonna go back to folks in the room. Is Yadi Wang ready to speak? Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? I'm Yadi Wang, and I'm a first generation farmer. 3 year in is my full time right now, and our farm owner Dax Henson, who owned the Henson's land, just outside of the whole area and 10 miles downstream from the Painted Rock Dam. And I'm here on behalf of him and myself together today. And well, thank you very much for the information on the hydrology. But one thing I want to recognize here is hydrology doesn't exist in nature by itself. It connects with biology, connects with chemistry. Everything is all together. Before I was farming, I was a research scientist at the University of Arizona, and then I managed the Biosphere 2 largest landscape evolution observatory project, building 2,000 sensors on each hill slope and 3 hill slope replicates, and working on sensors. Now, one of the first projects we did is we have 496 pressure transducers in this hill slope on each one of them, and then we irrigate them, did a hydrology modeling beforehand, and packed everything down and irrigate the water into the hill slope, trying to study the subsurface hydrology. And guess what? We had overland flow. And because when biology, especially vascular biology, microbes, is not present, and that water molecules cannot adhere on those soil material. And the reason I say that is a few months ago, well, last year, 10 months ago, we had a flood. That's a 30-year flood in 21-year drought. How bizarre is that when I tell everybody across the nation, they're just laugh their teeth off, right? Why the heck you guys have those dams, right? And we had to be the dam farmer. I lost my road to the farm. I have to drive an hour from Hyder all the way go to the farm. I lost North Farm and South Farm Junction. I have to kayak in 3,800 cubic feet per second, and hoping I'm not gonna be flowed down to San Carlos, right? So that's a real issue. Now, going back to that issue is there's not a lot of infiltration at the present, but afterwards, because I want to correct one thing is 1885, John Butler stand at Oatman Flats. That's the reason why Oatman Flats Ranch named the Oatman Flats Ranch. And 1885, he draw a painting. There's meandering water flow in the Gila River. And there's cows, there's cottonwood, there's wildlife, there's beavers. And now we don't have any of those after the dam is being established. And Gila River hasn't flowed for 80 years. That is the deadliest water in the United States. And when you don't have that water in the soil structure, no biological matter will live. That's why salt cedar take over. Native species gone away, and all the wildlife is gone away. And then when you have the flood go through, it's trailblazing, erode everything, and then causing surface eruption. And everything left is just like the whole desert in Sahara. And subsurface, we lost 3 wells, 3 out of 7 wells decommissioned because of the subsurface change and all the rocks and subsurface material pushing through the column, and that I could not pumping water out. And when we're talking about having AMA and talking about not trying to solve the ecological devastation because of the Clean Water Act and because of this Groundwater Act, and not trying to thinking about how we have to connect the ecological services together, I don't think it's not gonna solve the problem. And farmers are on thin margins right here across the country. Nobody is making money. And everybody, whoever is doing better is probably living on some of the subsidy. And some of the successful ones have to bank on large amount of acres and barely can make a life for living and working 24/7. And that's the issue. Now, I understand you guys are water department is not going to solve all those issues, but from a farmer's perspective, from general public's perspective, I think there are a few things has to be addressed. Number one is we would wish the federal, state level, all the agents work together. That's the bare minimum. We cannot have Corps of Engineers said, well, we're going to release water in 2 days, and then hell, we have to try to figure out on the ground on farmer ourselves. And where do we get the equipment to do that thing? And trying to build the dam, trying to protect the farmland, not being eroded away. And that has to be a consecutive conversation with the BLM, with the department in the state, with the federal agency all together to help farmer to find a comprehensive solution. When we have to follow the 404 permit, we want the federal agencies follow that 404 permit too. And number two is helping farmers here in the state. We're Arizona state is the agriculture state. And Maricopa County has the highest land loss rates in farmland across the whole nation. And we're pushing the farmers away from these historically rich agriculture values. And that is not acceptable, because when we do everything right, we can help conserve, help preserve, help in building that system. And at our farm, I have 87 degrees in the hot summer, July. When I walk in the field, I have dews in the field. And at relative humidity, 1 round of irrigation on cover cropping, sheep grazing is over 90%. And I have ladybugs in one of my 76 acres. There's no plant has less than 4 ladybugs. And I have dragonflies stayed around for 3.5 months when the surrounding desert is 7% of the relative humidity. When we work within the nature in the right way, we can help solve those problems. Not just myself, a lot of farmers can do this. So going back is helping us developing that market, and alternatively could help us make more margin. And no farmer want to spend more dollar trying to pump water out. And that's a big chunk of the operational expense. And so all those things have to be considered all together. And I'm not trying to be here outsmart anybody. I'm only 3 years in. I'm still learning from a lot of these folks that who are on the ground has so much experience. But the truth is, we want to have those scientific data. We also want to have the experience. People are on the ground doing a lot of things. And these values and all these conversations, let the farmers to make the decision and give the comprehensive solution themselves and see where the opportunity presents. And that's probably is going to be more of a bipartisan approach rather than single-sided. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Martin would like us to share her question. She's having some audio issues online. If all of these rights are grandfathered, how is the demonstrated unsustainability of existing uses addressed?
So within an active management area, there are specific statutory structures around grandfathered rights. So many existing uses are in some ways grandfathered in. Irrigation grandfathered rights, non-irrigation grandfathered rights. I covered that all earlier. However, those grandfathered rights are still subject to conservation requirements under the management plans. And again, that goes back to that slide that I showed with kind of a circle where the conservation requirements are designed to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. So how we use that groundwater, how we use those grandfathered rights might be subject to additional downward pressure on that groundwater use. The idea here is I think, I don't remember who brought it up, but it's really that equation of if you have an imbalance between your groundwater supplies and your groundwater demands, you can either increase your supplies or you can reduce your demands. The conservation programs are a demand tool, reducing those groundwater demands to help the AMA move toward its goal.
Thanks, Natalie. Coming back to folks in the room, Sonia Gasho.
Good evening. Hi, Natalie. I am Sonia Gasho. I am the Vice President of Cochise County Farm and Livestock Bureau. I own a ranch in Pierce, Arizona. We own the hardware store in Wilcox, and I'm also a founding board member of the Rural Water Assurance Foundation that came to be as we took on whether or not Wilcox would vote for an active management area, as well as Douglas in the Sulphur Springs Valley. We did go through the election process that was asked about earlier. Wilcox voted against it, Douglas voted for it, and are now having significant buyer's remorse. We are gravely concerned that this move to designate the Gila Bend Basin as an AMA through the director, who I have yet to meet. Natalie has been wonderful. I would not want her job in front of these people constantly asking these questions, but I have yet to meet Director Bushotsky in person. So I understand that frustration. We are gravely concerned that if Gila Bend is designated as an AMA through this statutory process, that Wilcox will be next, even though we voted against it. And to me, this just highlights again how each of our basins in this state are very different from each other. We are a closed basin. All the water flows into the Wilcox Playa and sits. It does not get recharged because of the soil type. And that an AMA, and Natalie's heard me say this many times, is not the right tool for these concerns and for rural water management. Active management areas were created with urban basins and growth in mind. And we would urge the director to listen to the rural management areas that he's trying to impose these things on. We have people who are conserving. Voluntary conservation measures have been far more effective in the almost 100 years that our conservation districts have been in existence than any mandatory conservation program will ever be. And we would urge him to wait for the legislature to do their job and to look at Senator Kerr's bill, because she started in the Wilcox Basin discussing what our needs are as agriculturalists. And ranchers are a huge part of that, with mountain front recharge and all of those other components that go in to managing our water. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to remind folks if we can try to keep comments short as we can, just so we can get through everyone here tonight that has come to give us feedback and comments. We'd like to hear from as many folks as we can. And just a reminder that we will be accepting written comments through 5 p.m. on Friday, February 12th, if we do not have the opportunity to hear from you this evening. Up next would be Stephanie Smallhouse.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Stephanie Smallhouse. I'm president of the Arizona Farm Bureau Federation, past member of the Governor's Water Council. Much of what I was going to say has been said already, but I do have 3 points that I'd like to make. You all were very involved in the local groundwater stewardship area discussion with the council. You all know quite a bit about it. You presented a lot of things that had to do with it. My question is, how much do you know about the basin management areas? Have you looked at SB 1221?
I know we are reviewing that as a department. I can't say much more beyond that.
Okay, I can appreciate that. Is there any way that creating an AMA in the oncoming months for Gila Bend Basin, is there anything that that's going to do to help the people that are here tonight and the people that live there? They can't wait until the end of the legislative session and the opportunity for people in the legislature to work through the legislative process and the democratic process to determine whether SB 1221 is a valid option.
I think what I'll emphasize here is this is not an initiation of proceedings. This is an opportunity for folks to provide comment on whether the director should initiate those proceedings. We are certainly going to take a lot of this feedback back to him.
But is there anything that developing an AMA by doing so would help these people or the groundwater situation in the basin before the legislative session is complete?
The statutory processes associated with establishing an AMA take time.
Thank you, Natalie. They do. They take a lot of time. And so do the deliberations of the legislature and giving SB 1221 an opportunity to make its way through the democratic process. So again, I am puzzled as to why the governor would pull this trigger early. My second question is, we have emphasized over and over again, and we did on the council, all of these rural basins are very different from each other. And you guys all know this, you study the basins. That's why it is so important for us to have a different framework in order to manage the groundwater in these areas where it is necessary. We have stressed through this whole process, because of the uniqueness of every basin, the importance of local input, local control, and local say. And since we know that there will be no vote, except for the vote of one, for this basin AMA, I'd like to take an informal vote for the record. How many of you in here would like the Gila Basin to become an AMA? Raise your hand. How many of you would not like to see your basin become an AMA? Stand up. I think this should be recorded for the record, because this is likely the only vote that's going to happen. And this is a very small segment of people that had to drive all the way to Phoenix for a hearing, an informal hearing, I understand. But the fact is that if you're going to regulate people, you should take the conversation to them and not make them come here. And my last point is more of a request, out of respect to all of you. I thank you for being here. I thank you guys for being here to answer these questions. I know it's tough. My last is a request. All of these people drove a very long ways to be here. And it's getting late. It's getting late for you guys. You're already going past the time. My request is just that you go through the rest of the comments of the people who are here before going to online. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Barb Esquivel. ADWR staff in the back, do we know if Barb may be in the overflow room? While they check, we'll go to the next. Michael Curtis. Thank you. Tim Dunn.
Good evening. Thank you. Tim Dunn, Representative Tim Dunn from Yuma Legislative District 25. I am a farmer from Yuma and appreciate everybody being here tonight. Wasn't planning on making comments, but I couldn't help from, I'm a politician. I have to make some comments. But so first off, I do question the timing of this meeting since we are discussing water management plans with the governor's office. So along with Stephanie Smallhouse, I do question the fact that we quickly decided to have this meeting and to throw that shot across the bow. So it's important to know. The generational commitment to the land is evident in this room, and conservation is always paramount. I believe stakeholder meetings above the comment period for informational purposes should commence with the staff and the director with these folks, along with additional to the comment period, because you see the experience in this room. You can learn more from them as you have those conversations above just a comment period, reading something on a piece of paper. We're in a 20-year drought, and the department has been given new dollars to monitor aquifers, and I do appreciate the data. That's what we appropriated the money for, so that we can have data. But it was hard to read the slides and stuff, so I hope you maybe made it already publicly available, but want to make sure we have availability to see those slides. I took notice that on the well monitor site off of the active pumping area, you had mentioned it was down 57 feet over 20 years. And it was indicative of the aquifer as a whole. So I was trying to figure out that because you were saying it was off of the pumping site and it only went down 57 feet over 20 years, along with one of the wells that was on the north side by Gillespie Dam that only went down 44 feet over 50 years. Those were indicative of the stability of the aquifer, but within the active pumping area, if we have that great fluctuation. So I'm not sure if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, if it sounds like what you're asking is why is that different? So when your well is screened near where there's surface water and there's a lot of inflows and surface water spills and there's a lot of activity happening there, you'll get a lot of peaks, right? And if you move away from any pumping centers and you're actually monitoring the whole system, you're seeing what the system itself is doing on a broader scale. So you're less influenced by localized effects like local pumping or local surface water surges or flows. So when you look at something that's distal, so away from those points, that's screened just in the alluvial aquifer itself, not responding to surface flows, and you look at it over multiple decades, that gives you a sense of the trend of the aquifer itself. So we don't have a model for the correction from earlier. Those are hydrographs of measured data. That was not a model result or theoretical.
You just made the comment that it was indicative of this aquifer as a whole, and so you have the active fluctuation. So we'll talk a little more offline on that, because if it's indicative of the aquifer, it's only went down 50 feet because it's more stagnant on the alluvial plain. So we'll talk about that more because I know other people are waiting. Balancing the management goal and the implementation of that goal, if the department moves forward, is very critical as we talk about this. Upstream raising of the dams, like Wade mentioned, has created impacts for these guys down on the Paloma Basin. Compensation could possibly be considered as they move forward for that dispensation. On a different note, there was a question asked about funds availability. There are state funds at the Cooperative Extension for the conversion of off or flood to drip or to sprinkler. So that money is available for those who are asking. And we also have money that's going to be available in the WIPA Water Supply Development Fund coming out soon. Ms. Smallhouse took my question. I appreciate that. But those guys online, go ahead and make yes in the chat if you want to have a AMA, and put no in the chat if you don't want to have an AMA, so we can make sure we get those recorded as well. And as a representative of this area, I'm committed to being at the table along with the farmers, the residents, Department of Water Resources, along with the two water chairs, Ms. Griffin and Senator Kerr. So we're gonna be here alongside you guys to work forward.
Thank you. I'd like to check back with Barb Esquivel.
I'm going to go ahead and read her comment.
Thank you.
The town of Gila Bend needs guaranteed water. I'm concerned that the truth about the water situation hasn't been shared with the people in the town until now. I'm in favor of more water protections now. Our Our groundwater needs to be protected so it can be insured for years to come.
Thank you, Teresa. Nicholas Kenny. Thank you. Muriel Marlat. And please correct me if I said that wrong.
Hello, I'm Merle Marlat, and I am Yuma County Farm Bureau President. So I'm not in that area, but I'd like to make some comments. One is with the legislator working on a drastic change to water AMAs and stuff like that, why do we need the top-down governor and director forcing this on us after a big water recharge year? I mean, it just seems like the urgency is totally gone from doing it because we had a good year in 2022. So for recharge for Gila Bend, I do disagree some with the Gila Bend guys. I think the use of the water in Bartlett Dam by raising that, if they want to make sure there's recharge in the Gila Bend area, anything that goes past there is just wasted. And if it comes into the Yuma area, makes problems like the guy from Open Flat was saying, we have to go around and it causes problems that way. And it can, in 93, pretty much whole valley flooded. So, we need those dams, but that water can't be used because we only get it every 10 years or so in the Yuma area. So what gets down there is just wasted. Trying to think what my other thing was. But that's the main part of it there. I remember now. My brother showed your work, and in the Welton Mohawk irrigation district, we don't have water levels dropping, but you're showing a lot of subsidence in the Welton Mohawk irrigation district. Is there something wrong with your maps, or is there something wrong with your determination of what's causing subsidence? Why would there be subsidence in there when the water table has not changed?
I would have to look into it, but it sounds like just off the cuff. It depends on where your wells are screened. So if a well is screened shallow, but the aquifer deeper is still being depleted, your well might not show what's happening at depth. That's a hypothetical. I'd have to look into it, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I don't think the wells are very deep in Welton Mohawk. They don't have to go deep, so they don't. The water table's maybe 10 feet, and our irrigation district has to pump water out of or we get water standing on fields, and they're the main pumper of water in our area, and we get return flow credits for that. It affects the amount of water we get from the Colorado River. To have a top-down and director decided instead of having our local irrigation districts in charge of that groundwater, is totally wrong. I think this bill by Senator Kerr is a much better improvement on water, and it gives us in rural areas control over our rural area water.
Thank you. I'd like to call Bobby Wirtz as our last speaker that has submitted a card. And then I'd like to give Nicholas Kenny and Sean Kerr the opportunity to speak again if they would like, having previously yielded time.
Good evening. Bobby Wirtz. I'm raised in the Pinal County area, Pinal AMA, come from a farming family. I am with the Land Advisors Organization. It's a real estate firm. We advise in the sale of land. I'm up here really kind of confused on why, when everything is really accelerated regarding this AMA. And I'm kind of confused on why it is not going to public vote and is being considered only as a designation. When we recently went through this process in the Wilcox area, and they went through a public vote, and we found out the local community was not in favor of it. I don't know, why is that not being considered for Gila Bend?
Well, I could answer that. The department can't initiate that. The voters within the basin are the ones who can initiate the public vote. So we have no ability.
But you can designate it.
Yes, we can designate it without a vote. Yes. But we can't call for one, is what I'm saying.
Okay. Again, it's just that's kind of confusing why you can do it, but you can't let the people vote for it. But I get to that is, when the community does vote for it, and say Pinal County, the Pinal AMA, one of the agreements was, it is a rural area it's towns surrounded by agriculture. Whenever you extinguish farmland, you would get 1.5 acre feet of credit for M&I. Pinal County farmers, agriculture, the cities, municipalities, all have been playing by the rules since the 1980 Grandfathered Management Act was passed. Just for 40 years down the road, the state to put a moratorium in place where those no longer work. You can no longer use groundwater to convert and do development. M&I, all that, basically what they agreed to and worked with the state to conserve was thrown out the door. I believe that moratorium was put in 2019, and then 3 years later was put in the Maricopa AMA, Phoenix AMA, excuse me. And so my question is, we have holes, and the existing AMAs have holes in them. They're not quite functioning as they were originally designed. Why are we trying to put a new AMA in place when the existing AMAs are not solved?
So to maybe back up a little bit, the extinguishment credit structures that you're referencing are created as a part of rules for each active management area associated with your assured water supply. Extinguishment credits are a tool to demonstrate consistency with the management goal under assured water supply. There are 7 criteria under assured water supply. And what you are referencing in the Pinal and Phoenix AMAs is an issue related to physical availability, which is a different criteria. So those extinguishment credits don't relate to that physical availability determination. For Gila Bend, rules would be developed related to that active management area specific to that area to consider things like extinguishment credits and consistency with the management goal.
But yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for clarifying. But that's the kind of point is we have issues within the Pinal and the Phoenix AMA. It is, hindering growth in rural towns, which this could potentially affect, Gila Bend. If Gila Bend agrees to these rules, just for them to put a moratorium over them, and if they did want to have development in the future, if there was an opportunity for new housing or an opportunity for an employer to come down there, the rules that we agreed to in the beginning seem to not truly hold effect down the road. And I just don't know why we're pushing into new AMAs when the existing AMAs have issues. Why are we not just focusing on existing AMAs?
So maybe something I would emphasize there is that the Assured Water Supply program is a consumer protection program designed to ensure that a given development has enough water for 100 years before it can be built. It's intended to protect those homeowners and their investment. I think some of the challenges related to physical availability in the Phoenix and Pinal AMAs are a demonstration of those limits, that we are needing to invest in additional alternative supplies in order to continue that type of growth. It's not an end to that. It's there are going to have to be different strategies for that, including alternative supplies. For Gila Bend, again, the rules for assured water supply and how those 7 criteria would be analyzed would be different. There would have to be rules created specific to a Gila Bend AMA, and each AMA is analyzed separately from others.
And the rules are created after the AMA is formed.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, we can go on all night, but I know we're getting to the end. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Sinker.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the staff for putting this information together. I'm State Senator Sina Kerr. I represent Legislative District 25, which is Western Maricopa County and into Yuma County. I also have been farming with my husband and our family for the last 4 decades. And I just want to mention for the record, first of all, it is absolutely egregious that an elected official would be denied a requested meeting with the director of the Department of Water Resources to discuss such a detrimental and important issue. I do not take it lightly, and we'll be working that out. And so I want to thank everyone who has worked so diligently on Senate Bill 1221. And those of you that are just learning about it, please look at it, read it. I'd love to have your comments, your input. You all thought of some incredible ways to develop a way to manage our basins in a way that allows the flexibility that we need for the different types of basins that we have in our areas. And more importantly, it provides for consent of the governed. And then also, if it gets to an active basin management phase that's laid out in the bill, it would have an elected body of local people and 2 appointed people on the council. And that's how it should be. I'm really proud of all the work you've done and will continue to work in good faith despite the way you all have been treated and the way that I have been treated. This is too important, and you have my commitment. We'll work together and get this through. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicholas Kenny, did you want to speak? Okay.
Nicholas Kenny, Maricopa County Farm Bureau. I only come up here to say that you've just heard your concluding speaker already. The person who's been the statesman in this water effort. Sitting next to her is Representative Griffin, who's been alongside. The leadership is coming from the legislature, and we need to allow that to play out. I would also remind everybody that water, just like agriculture, although it looks political at times, it is not political. It affects every citizen, every diverse group, every person of this wonderful and great state. And I would encourage all of you to take that lead as well. You are experts on this topic. I would encourage you to not be advocates on this topic, but to present the facts and allow the proper answer to come to the surface by meetings like tonight and following those who are taking the proper lead in this. So thank you very much. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you all. I want to remind everyone that ADWR will be accepting any written comments that anyone wishes to submit to the department until 5 p.m. on Friday, February 12th. Written comments or questions should be submitted to the attention of Sharon Scantlebury, whose contact information is in the back. What? Monday, February 12th, excuse me. And Sharon Scantlebury's cards are in the back if anyone would like her contact information. We have reached the conclusion of tonight's meeting. Thank you all for your engagement, participation, and attention. We know this is a lot of information. The slides and recording from tonight's meeting will be available on ADWR's website. We hope this meeting was helpful and informative. And again, we appreciate all of your time, attention, and for coming out and providing comments tonight. Thank you. With that, the meeting is adjourned.